Welcome back, class. So let's finish up talking about what our brain and nervous system are doing, how they are important in our health, and how they can be related to some different diseases. If we are looking at the cerebral cortex, this outer layer of the cerebrum, it can be divided into some 4 different lobes, 4 different regions, each of them named for a nearby bone in the skull. The frontal lobe, the front part, is in charge of voluntary control of skeletal muscles, reasoning, cognition, and logic. The parietal lobes are involved in conscious perception of touch, pressure, pain, vibration, taste, and temperature. The occipital lobe is involved in the conscious perception of visual stimuli. And the temporal lobe, where did my pointer go? The temporal lobe is involved in conscious perception of auditory and olfactory, auditory meaning hearing, and olfactory meaning smell. If we're looking at how information is processed in our cerebral cortex, it is divided into our different body parts. The cerebral cortex will receive information from our sensory organs and our somatosensory receptors. So somatosensory receptors are the parts of your body that provide information about touch, about pain, pressure, temperature, position of muscles and limbs. And the thalamus will direct those different types of input to distinct locations. And the information is received at the primary sensory areas and then is passed to the nearby association areas that process that particular feature of the input. It's integrated as sensory information that then passes to the prefrontal cortex, and that helps plan actions and movements. And you can see here, this integration isn't divided by how big an area of your body is. It's divided by how many neurons, how much neuronal activity is there. So your fingers take up a lot more space than your entire arm. Your knee and toes take up a lot more space than your entire leg. Your tongue, your lips take up a lot of space compared, your tongue's pretty small, but it takes up all this space. It's divided by how much of a nerve response that part of the body makes. So then why is the hand here larger than the forearm? The forearm would be the front part of your arm from your wrist to your elbow. Why is the hand larger than the forearm in this picture? If you did your homework, hopefully everyone did their homework, you remember this story about Phineas Gage. He damaged his frontal lobe, or his frontal lobe was damaged. And at that point, people didn't really think that the frontal lobe was that important. But as a result of changes in his behavior, we started to understand a lot of what the frontal lobe was actually doing. So damage to your frontal lobe can impair your decision making and your emotional responses. So Phineas Gage went from being a friendly, nice guy to being just kind of super emotional, kind of angry all the time, did not make good decisions. Eventually, his bad decision making led him to even lose his job because he was so unreliable as an employee. But his intellect and his memory were intact. And frontal lobes have a big effect on what's called executive functions. So things like being able to plan and process information, kind of the things that you would do as the boss of your body. Neuronal plasticity is super important. This is the ability of your nervous system to be remodeled after birth. So changes that you experience can strengthen or weaken signaling at a different synapse. Here you can see these neurons are being used, and so these synapses are going to be reinforced. This synapse is not being used, so it eventually gets broken. So connections between neurons are strengthened or weakened based on what activities you're having. And then as synapses are sending signals, It can even modulate the ability of that synapse, how strong that response is. A defect in neural plasticity may underlie autism spectrum disorder. This is a disorder that we really are still learning about and don't understand a lot about, but there's a lot of evidence it may be related to neuronal plasticity. And it's also essential in forming memories. Neuronal plasticity occurs because during development, each neuron is going to form a lot more synapses than it needs to properly function. So we see what is synaptic pruning. In synaptic pruning, synapses that belong to circuits that are useful are maintained and even reinforced, and less useful synapses are lost. So because of this, skills that you learn are usually learned by repetition and based on the strength of neuronal connections. So if you struggle to learn something, the more you spend working on it, the easier it'll become. If you're trying to learn to ride a bike, you just keep doing it until that synapses, those synaptic connections become so strong, it's automatic. If you are playing an instrument or playing a sport, your ability to perform that activity will just become automatic as you practice and practice and practice. And as you're trying to learn biology, as you spend more time learning and studying, you're able to develop those synapses and those connections to hold that information in your brain. A few more little notes. In your spinal cord, there are dorsal roots going from the peripheral nervous system into your central nervous system. So a dorsal root ganglion will have neural cell bodies of sensory neurons. Then ventral roots carry motor information from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. And your spinal nerve is formed by union of the dorsal root and the ventral root. Let's finish by talking about some nervous system disorders. So a lot of genetic and environmental factors contribute to diseases of the nervous system. This includes schizophrenia, depression, drug addiction, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. These are very complicated, trying to tease out what's genetic, what's invariable, what's an environmental variable. And scientists often carry out family studies because they have similar genetics, but not identical genetics, and similar environmental variables, but not necessarily identical environmental variables. So schizophrenia is a severe mental disturbance. Patients will typically have hallucinations, delusions. Sometimes they'll describe it as voices in their head telling them to do things. Schizophrenia affects neuronal pathways that use dopamine. And something interesting is the drug amphetamine, or speed, also stimulates dopamine release and produces symptoms similar to schizophrenia. So people who have been taking this drug will hallucinate. They'll be delusional. Depression, which includes both major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder, can express as a depressed mood, abnormal sleep, loss of appetite, a lower energy level. A lot of available drugs for depression increase the activity of biogenic amines in the brain, one of the neurotransmitters we discussed in our last chapter. Drug addiction is the compulsive consumption of a drug and loss of control in limiting intake. You lose the ability to find joy in life, and all you can do is focus on when you get your next hit. Addictive drugs can include both stimulants, things that increase your your brain activity, things like cocaine and amphetamine, and sedatives, things that just make you kind of out of it, like heroin. Addictive drugs will increase the activity of the brain's reward system. So your brain should be giving you pleasure, providing you with motivation and learning, but addiction will change that reward circuitry. And so you end up just craving the drug independent of any other pleasure of life. Alzheimer's disease is a mental deterioration, often with confusion and memory loss. Typically, it is short-term memories that are lost first. So a patient may still be able to, sing the songs they learned as a child or tell you stories about when they met their spouse, but they won't be able to tell you their children's names or tell you what they ate for breakfast that day. Alzheimer's disease is progressive, so early stages will be more mild, but eventually, as time goes by, patients get more severe. They may eventually need to be dressed, bathed, fed by others. Alzheimer's disease is associated with a death of neurons in many areas of the brain. Sometimes plaque buildup or deposits of things in the brain, and shrinkage of brain tissue as those neurons are dying. Currently, there is no cure, although there is a lot of research and some promising treatments. And then Parkinson's disease is a motor disorder. So it will lead to things like muscle tremors, kind of a shake, poor balance, a shuffling gait meaning how they're walking. Their facial muscles become more rigid, so they have a harder time displaying their emotions. This is also due to neurons in their midbrain dying, and currently there is no cure. Okay, so this is our last lecture about our body systems. So let me know what's been the most interesting thing you've learned. And give me a sample quiz question. It can be short answer, true, false, or multiple choice. Okay, that's it for this unit. We will be back after your exam to start learning about plants. See you later, biologists.